It looks like we are good to go.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome. We will be passing it over to the RGV Language Justice Collective to go over some instruction. Thank you.
Buenos días a todos. Les damos la bienvenida y vamos a comenzar con un mensaje de los intérpretes del colectivo de justicia, el colectivo de justicia del lenguaje del Valle del Río Grande. I'm going to give some instructions on how to access the interpretation in English, and I'll be right back to explain them in Spanish. Entonces, gracias a todos por su compromiso en crear un espacio bilingüe el día de hoy. La justicia del lenguaje incluye poder hablar, entender y hacerse entender en el idioma en que vive. Es una pieza necesaria y crítica para lograr que nuestra dignidad esté al frente en nuestros movimientos y que se respete nuestra autonomía como individuos, nuestra existencia y nuestro mundo por un mundo donde quepan todos los mundos. Y al crear un espacio donde interpretamos del inglés al español y del español al inglés, es trabajo de todos, no solamente los intérpretes. Así es que les pedimos, por favor, que nos ayuden a recordar hablar alto, claro en su micrófono y sobre todo despacio. Por favor, no utilicen acrónimos que no todos conozcan, sino que digan todas las palabras que quieren representar. Y en un momento vamos a encender la función de interpretación aquí en Zoom. Usted va a ver un globo en la parte baja de su pantalla con un mensaje sobre la interpretación de idiomas. Va a hacer clic en el globo y va a elegir su idioma en el que le gustaría participar, ya sea inglés o español, para escuchar durante la sesión. Si nos acompaña a través de su celular o su tablet, puede hacer clic en los 3 puntos en la esquina derecha de la parte baja de su pantalla, elija interpretación de idiomas y después seleccione su idioma. Asegúrese siempre de hacer clic en finalizado y estaremos listos. Gracias. Thank you to everyone for your commitment to creating a bilingual space today. Language justice includes being able to speak, understand, and be understood in the language in which we live. It is a necessary and critical piece to ensure that our dignity is at the forefront when building movements with each other, and that our autonomy as individuals, our existence, our world is respected for a world where all worlds fit. And creating a space where we interpret from English to Spanish and Spanish to English takes all of us, not just the interpreters. So we ask that you remember to please help us out by speaking loudly, clearly into your microphone, and most importantly, speaking slowly and at a moderate pace so we can capture everything that you're sharing. We ask that you please not use any acronyms that not everyone is familiarized with. And in a moment, we're going to start the interpretation function here on Zoom. You will see a globe in the lower part of your screen pop up. Please click on that globe and select the language in which you'd like to participate today, whether that's English or Spanish. And if you're joining through your smartphone or your tablet, you can click on the 3 dots on the bottom right corner of your screen, select language interpretation, and then choose your language. Make sure to always click on done and we'll be all set. We can now turn on the interpretation function. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, is this Alejandra's time now to introduce this project?
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Yeah, buenos días. Good morning, everybody. My name is Alejandra Lenes, and I'm going to introduce the project. So the Democratizing Racial Justice Project, which is funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, was envisioned by Dr. Jackie Cuevas with Dr. Rhonda Gonzalez and myself. It is a collaborative project among UTSA's Women's Studies Institute and the Department of Race, Ethnicity, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. The Esperanza Peace and Justice Center, Alamo Community Colleges, Mexican American Civil Rights Institute, and the Institute of Texas Cultures to engage in community-based endeavors to envision and realize racial justice. Through site-based collaborations, democratizing racial justice elevates co-created community knowledge for just societies, transform access to the Academy for People of Color and first-gen students, and propagates transformative pedagogies in ethnic studies and the humanities. Democratizing racial justice, building on an established network of partners, brings together activist scholars, students, and community members to formulate community-centric ethical collaborations where people of color remember histories, responds to community needs, conduct collective research, and imagine thriving futures where racial justice is possible. Democratizing racial justice seeks to transform the role of higher education, ethnic studies, and the humanities in particular, has in combating the erasure of people of color and their histories and reimagining a society in which people are equally valued. So we thank you very much for joining us today for the People's Academy for our session on Punishing the Poor, a community response to San Antonio code enforcement in communities of color.
Gracias, Alejandra. And I'm not sure who's doing the spotlighting, but if we can get rid of that slide for the next few folks, including the video. My name is Graciela Sanchez, and I'm here representing the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center. And with me today to help facilitate this conversation is Kayla Miranda. Kayla.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kayla Miranda, and I am a housing justice organizer on the west side of San Antonio. I started out because I was being wrongfully evicted, and I am a public housing tenant on the Apache side of the Alazan Apache courts. And the last few years, I have been working with community members with Esperanza, Historic Westside. To fight the demolition of the Alazan, and now that that has been successful, we are working to preserve the neighborhood.
Thank you, Kayla. So before we bring on Heather, Wei, and the other amazing participants of this Plática, I want to have Viviana, or whoever's doing this work, is go ahead and show a short four-minute video called La Gloria. This is the demolition of La Gloria in 2002 and part of the inspiration for our work.
Mi abuelita, Doña Maria, is like my God. She's my spirit ghost guardian from the other side. Every once in a while, I pray to her, like Thursday evening after our court hearing. Underneath la luna llena, coixauqui volando, I prayed to my grandmother to watch over La Gloria. With burning smoke, I walked a circle of protection around the building and lit a candle to Santa Marta. Marta slayed dragons. That was her milagro. When they found out that dragons didn't exist, they took away her sainthood. White light burning for Santa Marta. I thought that she and the spirit of my grandmother would help us fight our demonios, our demons. Gente hecha de corazón de piedra, que no ven, no escuchan, que no sienten. But the wind was burning strong that evening and blew the candle out. I looked up at the sky and saw the moon embarazada hidden behind the clouds, and I tried to imagine the people dancing on the rooftop of La Gloria. Black dresses brushed the tops of trees as they dance against the sky, 3 shades of blue touching each other underneath a full moon. My grandmother danced here, someone told me, and she is with you now. An 82-year-old woman donated $40 while we were fundraising for the building and said, "I'm going to dance there again," pointing to the dance floor in the sky. My own grandmother, the one I prayed to, never danced at La Gloria, nor did my mother. But that Monday after Easter, when they tore La Gloria down, I cried. Each time the bulldozer hit the building, I felt it in my heart, and I remembered my own history. Mi mami, una sata atrás India y China, inmigrante, inglés hablado con acento, piel morena, nariz de Olmeca. I remembered my own history. My grandmother, warrior woman, body of Coatlicue, partera, tortillas brought fresh from the tortilleria because she refused to cook. I remembered my own history. Mi piel más güera, being made fun of because of the way I spoke English, being made fun of because of the way I spoke Spanish. Each time the bulldozer hit the building, I felt it in my heart, and I remembered my own history, my 6 nieces and nephews, and wondered, who will tell them the stories of their people? Each time the bulldozer hit the building, I felt it in my heart, and I thought silently, this is cultural genocide. To take away our history is to kill our people, our soul, our spirit. I watched them tear La Gloria down and knew that even though my grandmother had never danced there, she was there that day too. With every brick fallen, I heard her say, "We cannot forget."
Okay, thank you. And we can get back to different formats that we can see people. Thank you. Again, my name is Graciela Sanchez, and it's always hard for me to listen and watch that video, even though it's almost a 20-year-old documentary. But it is essentially a lot of the work that we've been doing. It is about cultural genocide. This was 2002, but I remember in 1998 marching with people from the Victoria courts as they tried to save the first public housing in the city that got demolished. It got demolished, I think, in 2000, but the people were demonstrating in 1998. And what happened? 1,500 individuals got displaced. The elementary school right next door closed down. The Handy Andy and HEB on Bresa Street closed down. Churches and restaurants, so much shut down. And the residents didn't really want to leave. And because I lived a few blocks away, I got to, be a community member that supported them. But there was, again, you could see the tensions around race and around class. And, the suggestion, of course, was this new Hope 6 project by the HUD department, was that it would mix incomes, but it wasn't mixing incomes equitably. It was like, you're 100% poor people now living downtown San Antonio. Now, guess what? You're only going to be 10 or 20%. And again, so much got demolished and the people never returned. The demolition of a little casita, of a multifamily public housing entity, of buildings such as La Gloria, the Malt House, and the hundreds and thousands of casitas lost in the 1960s in Laredito or the 1970s through urban renewal is a loss of culture. In the case of individual home residents, the city of San Antonio continues to order the destruction of so many families' homes. There is trauma around that demolition and that displacement. Additionally, a community's history and its cohesiveness and its character disappear. And that is what today's conversation is about. And today, we look at the role of code compliance and enforcement in continuing to displace and demolish our homes and our neighborhoods. Code compliance is connected to the entire discussion of housing, and the discussion of housing is built on this future population growth. And we've been hearing about that since the decade of downtown, and then when the city was putting together the, I'm forgetting the name, but the comprehensive plan, and it was all because 1 million people were coming and 1 million people were coming. And the fact is, it is about taking this Westside area, and sadly already having taken over the East Side, and transforming it into an affluent, professional family community, just like we've seen in what was then Victoria Courts and now Hemisphere, or the whole area known as Southtown. And again, I will just go back to a personal experience. I bought a home in what is now known as Southtown in 1992. I was, $27,000 home for 1,000 square feet. That same home today is valued at $273,000. And that, $172,000 of that is land value alone, right? I just looked that up this morning, so I know the numbers are correct. We Westsiders and Eastsiders had to live in our neighborhoods because those with power and influence did not want us to live downtown. And so they got rid of us and they pushed us out on both sides. And for the last 120, 30 years, we lived in this very segregated Redline neighborhood. But now everybody wants to come back downtown. So they all want to live downtown. And since they can't afford downtown, guess what? The neighborhood's right around. And so that's what we started seeing years ago. And because of that, we were concerned about the misuse of code compliance for years. And because we were doing the saving of La Gloria or Casa Maldonado back in 2008 to 2011, people who were being threatened with eviction and demolition did call the Esperanza. This was before the Historic Westside Residents Association came into existence, as well as the fact that WPA was just forming at that time. As we tried to offer people help and advice, we began to realize that those code violations were trivial and unfounded. Like, for one example, this woman that lives here on Buena Vista Street called and said, they keep on telling me that I have to get rid of this big piece of wood and it's not mine and I just don't know. And now it's costing me $2,000 or $3,000 and I have to go to, to the police station to deal with this. And she was traumatized. And we went to visit her house, and in the alley, there was one of those huge utility posts that are owned by CPS. CPS is the culpable person in this case, but the city's code compliance did not bother to call on CPS, did not, they just kept on threatening her. And, she was losing hair. Her eczema was growing higher. I mean, it was just very traumatic for her. And fortunately, because she reached out, we were able to help her and we got rid of that problem. But she was just one of those moments. So in 2014, 2015, one of our interns, Elizabeth Joy Delgado, I want to give her a shout out because she did this research. She ended up looking through code compliance violations and pulled together statistics initially between 2013 and 2015. or 2017. And what we see between 2013 and 2015 is that the code compliance violations that are highest are in districts 2, and then district 5, and then district 1. And let's put together again what else is happening. In 2015 is when the Wheatley courts get demolished. So, this is coincidental or is it a propósito, right? And then we're also now seeing the increase of District 3 in the last few years. And what's happening in District 3? Well, UNESCO named the missions as part of the World Heritage, gave it a World Heritage status. So, while they're improving the neighborhood, they're also getting rid of what we don't want to see. So we also were very concerned that a lot of the code compliance violations were in response to anonymous phone calls. So who's calling? Is it just your next door neighbor who is afraid, to be busted by you? Or is it really, real estate folks, land speculators, developers? And that's, those are questions to be asked, and we're concerned about that. And so in conclusion, I just want to say that the stark reality is that the city of San Antonio is assisting in the transformation of our land from a historic community of people of color, both in the East Side and West Side, to just another affluent, extended downtown area, a major land grab. So we really welcome this report that Heather Way and her colleagues wrote to bring broader attention to the reality of city-supported gentrification. And we look forward to this report to help to move the conversation along and force the city to take responsibility for the consequences of their policies and actions. So I'm hoping that we have Heather with us at this point, because we would love to hear from Heather, who will give us a short presentation of her report, Ousted, the City of San Antonio's Displacement of Residents Through Code Enforcement Actions, followed by a question and answer session. And then we will continue after she's left us. Unfortunately, she has another compromiso, and she will be followed by Leticia Sanchez, Antonia Castañeda, and Lawson Picasso. So let me pass it on to Heather Way. Thank you for being here with us, Heather.
Great, thanks for having me. Can you hear me okay, Graciela and others?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can.
Great. I have some slides to show, just a little bit more background about myself. I'm on the faculty at University of Texas School of Law. Prior to that, I was an attorney at Legal Aid. I've been working on housing justice and affordable housing issues for about 25 years. And done a lot of work in the realm of code enforcement around the state, and just really appreciate the opportunity to get to come and share the findings from our report. One of the things I want to point out is that the report is just a snapshot in time. We took a deep dive into examining the city of San Antonio's orders to vacate. These are orders that either city staff or the Building Standards Board issues to residents, telling them they're ordered to leave their homes within 48 to 72 hours. And then we also examined the city's use of demolition orders that are also often accompanied with one of these orders to vacate. And they're always accompanied with an order to vacate when the home is occupied. But I want to recognize that, as Graciela pointed out, that there's a larger history here, and that we just are focused on this one snapshot in time. And it's really important to understand that history, and want to call out that our report grew out of concerns that we were hearing from community leaders and residents through our partners such as Texas Housers. I also want to give a shout out to Texas Housers. Our report has a number of really important maps that do a great job of capturing visually what's happening with these orders, and that Texas Housers, Mia Lassif and the team there were responsible for putting those maps together. So I want to thank them for that. So just in terms of going through the slides, I just have a few slides. I want to just give you an overview of our findings. So if you could switch to the next slide. we have 5 key findings in our report, and we can go ahead and just skip over that because I'm going to go through each of these in order, and then just give a snapshot of our recommendations. There's a lot to cover in the report. I don't have time to cover it all, so I'm just going to give you a high-level overview. So our first finding is that San Antonio is by far an outlier when it comes to the use of these orders to vacate and demolish occupied homes. And by an outlier here, I think this graphic does a good job of capturing that from that period of time from 2015 to 2020, the city of San Antonio issued 626 orders to vacate and demolish occupied homes. These are people's homes, homeowners and renters. In contrast, the cities of Dallas, Houston, Austin, and Fort Worth combined issued no more than 16 such orders. And so it was clear to us in our research that San Antonio is taking a much more aggressive approach to using these code enforcement tools that are resulting in displacing people from their homes. Next slide, please. I then want to show you, if you can, yes, thank you. I want to share you a series of slides that hone in on this finding here, and that is about where these orders are concentrated. We looked at where these orders are concentrated and how they're connected to code enforcement activity. This map here shows where the city is conducting what they call code enforcement sweeps. These are proactive code enforcement actions where the city picks areas that they're going to send out code officers to target for code enforcement. So the areas in blue here are areas where the city is sending out officers to engage in what they call proactive code enforcement, where they're going out and proactively looking for code violations. And as you'll see, I mean, you recognize these neighborhoods here, the West Side, East Side, and South Side. These are neighborhoods in San Antonio with some of the highest concentrations of Latino and Black residents. And then if you'll go to the next slide, we also then mapped where then the location of these orders to vacate and demolish. And you'll see here from this map, the darkest red areas are the areas of the city with the highest percentages of Hispanic or Latino and Black residents. And those are the areas where you see the highest concentration of these orders to vacate and demolish. So the black, green, and the red dots are the orders to vacate and demolish. And you'll see that really heavy concentration in those dark red areas. And then if you'll go to the next slide, I think it's really important, and Graciela talked about a lot of the history behind this, but this is really important because there's a huge racial justice component of this, that the same neighborhoods where you see the largest numbers of these orders, where people are being forced from their homes, are the same areas that have been shaped by decades of public and private disinvestment and racially discriminatory policies and laws. This map here are the federal government's historic redlining maps. These are areas that were mapped. The red areas are ones where banks were told, don't lend here. These are not safe neighborhoods. These also happen to be the neighborhoods that had the highest percentage of Black and Latino residents. And again, no coincidence that you see today, these are the areas where people couldn't get access to loans to repair their homes. And so it's no coincidence that these are the areas where families struggle the most to be able to repair and maintain their homes, and where you see the highest numbers of homes with repair challenges. Next slide, please. So this next slide is a finding of one of the things we did in a report is we identified where are the clusters, where do you see the highest concentration of these orders. And the two largest clusters of orders to vacate and demolish from 2015 to 2020 are in the near West Side and near East Side of the city. What you see, the highlighted areas here, yellow, orange, and red, are the census tracts with the highest total number of orders to vacate and demolish. And the red area right there in the heart of the near West Side is the area with the highest number of orders. If we can go to the next slide, please. This just quick snapshot. This is from that time, this period of time, the council districts where you see the highest number of orders. Council District 5 is the highest with 299 orders, followed by Council Districts 2, 1, and 3. And the next slide, please. Just wanted to show one of the clusters. Here's the Westside cluster, where you see that this is where you see 4 out of the 5 census tracts with the highest number of these orders are in the near West Side. In these census tracts, the ethnic makeup is close to 95% Hispanic or Latino. The median age of homes is 73 years. The median household income is significantly lower than the city's median income. And one of the things we also did is we mapped the location of where development pressures are and where different federal and city incentives are in place to incentivize development. And you'll see that that is within and right on the border of this area where you see the largest number of these orders. Next slide, please. The third finding that we have in the report is that a finding about what we call due process, of making sure when someone is ordered from their home that they have a chance to a fair process and for their voices to be heard and a chance to dispute the city's findings. And what we found is that unlike any of the other large cities in the state, the city of San Antonio routinely orders people to leave their homes without any kind of hearing. In that 6-year period, 337 households were ordered to leave their homes by city staff without any kind of judicial process, without a BSB hearing, told to leave their homes within 48 to 72 hours. The graph here shows just a contrast between these orders to vacate by city staff, where there's no process, versus those that go through the Building and Standards Board, which provides for a hearing process. This is very concerning. And then the next slide. Another finding that we had in the report is that when it comes, the next 2 findings deal with what is the city doing to help residents who are living in conditions where their homes need repairs. And this finding here pertains to repair assistance. And we found that while the city does have a major home repair assistance program, it's severely inadequate in terms of addressing the needs, and that the major home repair program only served 65 households in 2020. And one of the things we also found is that if you lack clear title, which is very prevalent in the near West Side and near East Side, where you have generations of families have inherited their homes, that families didn't have access, couldn't afford lawyers to get wills and do expensive estate planning. So homes have passed down more informally, and people don't have that clear legal paper trail, but they're legal owners of the home, but they're immediately disqualified from getting any kind of repair assistance. And that also then has a disproportionate impact on Black and Hispanic homeowners. Next slide, please. And then the 5th finding is about what happens when the city displaces residents. How are they assisted? What happens in terms of the assistance they receive? And even though the city did set up a risk mitigation fund in 2018 to help support families, we found, and even though state law actually requires relocation assistance, there's a state statute that says that when a city displaces a family through a code enforcement action, they're required to provide relocation counseling and financial assistance. Only 8 of the 209 residents that received a vacate order from 2018 through 2020 received any financial assistance from the city's risk mitigation fund. And that's also a problem. And then the last slide, 2 slides here are just about our recommendation. Our first recommendation here is the city needs to stop issuing vacate orders and demolition orders, and also utility disconnection orders that were not part of our study but kept popping up in our evaluation. We think this needs further review and is also troubling, but that needs to happen via a judicial process. People need to have a chance to have their voices heard. And then the second recommendation is to amend the city's code to limit the instances in which a city can force someone out of their home when the home has repair needs. The third recommendation is to expand access to the city's major and minor home repair programs. Let's do everything we can to keep people in their homes and not displace them. The fourth recommendation here is that there needs to be a code enforcement program that advances racial justice, and that there needs to be an elimination of code enforcement sweeps that target neighborhoods with high concentrations of Latino and Black residents. And then the next slide and last slide, our last final three recommendations, is that, the city needs to be following state law and providing relocation assistance and counseling to all residents who are ordered to leave their homes, to make sure that they can land on their feet and find secure alternative housing. There needs to be a cooperative code and compliance program, a more cooperative approach to code enforcement, where instead of just coming in and telling people they need to leave their homes and leaving flyers of numbers to call, that we need social workers coming in to address a more holistic range of needs that many residents have, that there need to be other partners brought in to bring in with the primary goal of helping residents be able to stay in their home and to bring their home up into a condition that is safe and remains affordable. And then last, that before ever ordering someone to leave their homes, not only does there need to be a hearing, but people should have a right to a counsel, to attorney, to represent them and help them make their voices heard. And that's all I have in terms of the presentation, and ready to answer questions. Graciela, did you want to start out with some questions?
I think Kayla was going to ask the first question. Maybe.
So our first question is from Facebook, and it says, do you have the demographic ages of those orders as well? Does the data show that most of those are elderly individuals?
That's a really good question. We do not. So we have this information came from the city that we're reporting through open records requests. So we have a list of all the addresses where all these orders, but the city doesn't, as far as we can tell, doesn't track demographic information on the specific orders. The demographic data I presented is from the census tract where these orders are concentrated. And so we pulled from the census data on, this census tract has the highest number of orders. What are the demographics in that community? We only looked at race, ethnicity, and income, but that information, someone could come in and pull in other demographic information, but we did not do that, unfortunately.
Yeah, and maybe later on that person that asked that question can try to join in and give us some of her experiences, or their experiences, sorry.
Yeah, that'd be great to hear.
Heather, I know that since your report came out, and in the same way that we found when we put together our reports, was they just ignored it and just, dismissed all that data. Again, coming from them, right? You can go to the city's, website and pull some of this stuff out, just because they're trying to be transparent. But they're saying your numbers are wrong. You're not doing apples to apples. So Michael Shannon is dismissing your report. And as a matter of fact, on Monday at 10:30 at the B session, anybody watching this can go to city to the B session meeting, and maybe if you have a chance, come in and speak and say, I watched this plática and you're wrong and we're concerned about this. But how do you respond to Michael Shannon's dismissal of your numbers? And
so our numbers are the city's numbers, and the spreadsheets we put together came directly from city open records requests. So we asked the city, tell us, send us a list of all the orders to vacate and demolish that you've issued in the past 6 years. At first they were very reluctant to send that information. They didn't return our calls, but we did get that's the city's data. And when Michael's referring to comparing San Antonio with these other large cities, we had very in-depth conversations with all these other 4 large cities, with the head of their code departments and sometimes their city attorneys were on the calls and said, listen, how often does someone forced out of their home, how often do you issue one of these orders in your city? And they're like, this is very rare. This is not something that, you know, if we've done it at all, you know, 4 times, 5 times most, they can actually remember the cases. Oh yeah, there was that one resident, you know, we did everything to help, and we just, that it was extremely dangerous. Like they really, you know, they had to leave. And we provided them relocation assistance. And so it's just not correct to say that somehow we're not comparing the right data across these cities. It is, and we even, I mean, there are former San Antonio officials that work with some of these cities, and San Antonio has a reputation around the state of being a very aggressive enforcer when it comes to code enforcement and in terms of these types of actions. And I think the numbers back that up.
So we have a few more questions, but before we go to them, just what is it that these other cities are doing that keeps them down to 4 or 5 cases?
Yeah, I think, you know, I think one is, I think it's like worth having more in-depth conversations with the cities about what it is that they do leading up to when code comes in to help people be able to stay in their homes and repair their homes. What we know is from these conversations about like what that process looks like. But one thing is just this culture of code enforcement. It's like the cities there say like, listen, we're only, if there's just like an imminent endangerment of risk where someone, you know, just really, I mean, there are cases we need to recognize that where folks are, where they're better off, they need to be able to get some alternative shelter because there's been a fire or there's been some kind of major structural, you know, collapse in the shelter. We need to help them relocate. What the cities reported to us is they have lots of use of social workers. They bring in as many supports as possible to help people stay in their homes. But I think it's definitely worth a deeper examination of like comparing what those practices look like that we didn't get an opportunity to get to in this report that I wish we had.
Thank you. Go ahead, Kayla. Do you want to ask a few other questions?
Yeah. Trying to go back to the top of the questions. Do we know typically what happens to the residents who are displaced? And are there studies currently being done that anyone knows of? That
is such an important question. And no, we don't, and we need to know. And that's something that needs, that should be part of the city's process, is a policy that tracks what those outcomes are. What happens to families when they're told they need to leave their home in 48 to 72 hours when their home is demolished? We've heard anecdotally, we know of families that have ended up in homeless shelters there, that have ended up in much worse conditions. But we don't have that data, and we should have it, and the city should be collecting it. And I think that's a really important policy change to be tracking that. We have a question from YouTube. How or will one be able to access your presentation and report? So where can people go to see your report? Yeah, I wanted one for the community organizers in terms of this presentation itself, where that will be, but our report is available on our website as well, and I can put that in the chat. But Graciela and others, do you want to speak to how people can access this presentation?
Well, we're taping this presentation, and so we will continue to have it on Facebook and YouTube. And I think I'll have Natalie just drop a link to this report. So if you're able to access that there, you can just link to it, and you'll be able to read the 72-page report, I think.
And there's an executive summary.
And there's an executive summary, but it's much more fun to watch the whole. Read
Here,
the whole
I put it in the chat. Oh, that's a
okay. Thank you. All right. So Carolina asks, Heather, thank you for your work and your presentation. You mentioned that you gathered the data by class and ethnicity. Did you gain insight about gender dynamics in this displacement from this data, or in general from your research?
We did not look, sort of coming back sort of to that earlier question to, the data that we got from the city, and I don't think the city tracks this, they don't think they track race, ethnicity, or gender, or any demographic information about the families they're displacing. So the best information you can get is from the census in terms of looking at what the demographics are in this census tracts where you see the highest volume of these orders. But that doesn't get out exactly, I don't think that would do a good job of getting at what the gender is of residents who are most impacted by these orders, or like what the family status, how many people have kids living in the home or not. I haven't seen that information and don't know how to get that, but perhaps there's others on the phone who've done that kind of research that can chime in on that. But I think these are great questions of wanting to understand more. Maybe this is something, if the city of San Antonio is not adopting, could be another policy change. Hey, let's track this data.
So our next question is from Margarita. Clearly, the city has violated the rights of residents. With the evidence provided, can a major lawsuit be initiated by the community? It moved up 1 second.
The community
and
and
other organizations. My chat box just flipped right up the screen.
I know that there's a pending lawsuit that Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid has filed against the city of San Antonio. That's public information, and challenging the city's failure to provide relocation assistance. And I think that's really important in all of this is that if you've been impacted by these actions personally, or people do, I think it's just important to connect with community leaders, with folks at Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid and other organizations, so that they can be aware of how you're impacted and identify opportunities for advocacy.
yes, and I think a slide towards the end of this presentation, of this 2-hour presentation, will include 3 or 4 other legal services, including St. Mary's University's community, and with names and addresses and phone numbers.
Oh, great.
So we can do that. Because there's another question asking about how can poor people get to vindicate their due process.
But yeah, I think it's great to be able to collect those, the stories, as I know that has already been done for years, but making sure that those stories are collected, and that that there's just, if folks' rights have been violated, that there's an opportunity for them to contact someone about that, so that those can be potentially part of any advocacy efforts.
And there is a question about where families going to go, considering real estate and rental prices are extremely high. I mean, I think that's a question, and maybe we can actually leave it up to Antonia and Leticia, who are coming up next and who have been talking about these questions and concerns. Do you want to take Kamala's question?
Yeah. Not to jump ahead, but how can we change city policy and procedure? Exposing the damage is crucial, but there should not one more demolition or other major code compliance damaging abatement.
Yeah, I mean, a lot, that's a great question for other folks on the call that are there on the ground and doing this and have been trying to do this advocacy work for a year. I do know, I can speak from experiences around the state. I know of many examples where, as a result of communities banding together and working on policy changes, that change is possible. I know here in the city of Austin, where I'm based out of, that there were, for a number of years, groups that banded together and were able to get a number of positive reforms, improving the code enforcement and making sure that their activities were advancing housing justice and racial and social justice. And I know in Dallas that a group of community leaders were able to come in and band together community residents and leaders to get some positive changes there. So change is possible, and like everything, it's about making your voice heard. And I know that's that's been done for years there, and as time has met a wall. But I think it's just important. I know it's hard, but just to not give up.
I know, I'm not sure about your time, Heather, it's 10:53, but we have a question about how could we have a more restorative approach to maintaining safe and affordable housing? I don't know if, again, you've seen this in Dallas or Fort Worth or Houston or Austin.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot more since actually we came out with a report and been talking to more people about the report. And one of the ideas that came to mind is I think, that different city departments have different values and different goals. And then I do see a fundamental problem of having code enforcement be part of all of it, part of the development, part of the DSD development services department, separate from housing, because the housing department has a goal of hopefully helping people access and preserve affordable housing, and the DSD, who oversees all the code enforcement activities, has a quite different mission. And one thought I had is like, what would it be like if you moved out all the code enforcement of single family or just of residents, if you move that into the housing department, so that you could take and put in place a more holistic view with different kinds of goals? I think you'd have different outcomes. So that's not something I put in the report. It's something I've just been thinking a lot about, is, how do you create this more holistic outlook? And I think one is doing a better job of having sort of a unified mission and approach, and not these competing missions of departments who are out there in these communities.
Yeah, and I know that we've been asking for that, and again, maybe Leti or Antonia can speak to that, but in the same way that we're talking about domestic violence cases shouldn't just be about police coming to the front and not knowing what to do, that they come in with a team. The same thing with police brutality. I mean, just don't send a police officer when it's a mental, a need for a mental social service worker to come in, and so things like that.
And I do think there's a new demolition diversion program that City Council's a pilot program that was set up this summer, that I understand maybe it's just been used recently, maybe just for the first time, and it'll be a program to track. But I think there's potential there. Yeah, the idea of like, okay, if hopefully there's more of a holistic approach being taken in those cases. I don't know yet. It's a new program and remains to be seen, but potentially a really positive opportunity there to bring in a more holistic approach.
Well, I think we'll end there because there are a few other questions, but I think the other folks that are coming up can probably answer those questions. And Heather, thank you very much for being with us. And if you want to pop back in, we welcome you towards the latter part of this conversation.
Thanks for having me, and just thanks for all you all do. I'm just happy that we were able to play a little small part in helping shine some more light on the issues I know the community's been advocating for years, and just appreciate all you do. Thank you.
And we keep on working together. Muchas gracias. Thank you. And let's send it back to Kayla and now Leticia.
So our next speaker is someone very special to me. I met her in 2019. I had just received an eviction notice, and I was being evicted from the apartment that I currently live in. I was given her phone number by a friend that she left a flyer at her door, and I actually texted her. I didn't call. Sorry for the background noise. I have people in the house. I didn't actually call her. I texted her, and my court date was 2 days away, and she actually went with me. She was the only person that was willing to help. She wouldn't do things for me, but she taught me how to fight for myself. And the knowledge and experience that I have gained from her, the respect, the kindness, has completely changed my life. Here I am 2 years later. I just served on the bond committee, the housing bond committee for the city. And last week I was just appointed to the building standards board, where I will be serving for D5. And none of that could have ever happened if it hadn't have been for her. So I welcome Leticia Sanchez, the co-chair of the Historic Westside Resident Society, and my good friend.
Hi, thank you, Kayla. Sorry that the circumstances we met in were so difficult, but I'm grateful that we met, and now we're great friends. I'm Leticia Sanchez, and I was born, raised, and I'm a resident of the near west side of San Antonio, or as we call it, El Mero West Side. Our barrio is located just west of San Antonio's downtown and separated from the downtown area by railroad tracks and bridges. It's the area of San Antonio which many Mexican immigrants, working class poor, and people of color settled in because they weren't allowed to purchase property in other parts of the city due to redlining and other such policies. San Antonio is segregated, and according to the SA 2020 City Council profiles, our district is 94.9% Hispanic, as Heather also stated in her report. It's also part of the city that historically has received very few resources and little investment by the city. And even in the 21st century lacks infrastructure as well as digital connectivity in many parts of the district. In addition to being a resident of this neighborhood, as Kayla stated, I'm also the co-chairperson of the Historic Westside Residents Association. Our residents are comprised of legacy homeowners, renters, and public housing tenants whose families have lived in this part of San Antonio for many generations, as Graciela also mentioned. Now, because living in the downtown area or its proximity is appealing to many, our neighborhood has become prime real estate. So developers and speculators are working hard to buy up our houses and properties. The city is also incentivizing development in our area, as it did in District 2, which is just east of downtown and predominantly African American and Hispanic as well. So it's not surprising to us that the number of code compliance violations is the highest in our neighborhood, as it was in District 2 before so many residents lost their homes and were displaced. As concerned residents, we saw numerous historic structures begin to come down in our neighborhood. Before our association was established, the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center and the Westside Preservation Alliance began the work of preserving our homes and buildings. Because we felt that our neighborhood was under attack and our community had no true representation or voice before the city, some of our residents came together to establish our association and fought to become the city's recognized resident association for our neighborhood. Our members volunteered to represent the needs of our community and residents by speaking out at city council meetings, by representing the community at zoning commission meetings, and by representing residents and or just buildings at building standards board meetings when homes or buildings are being considered for demolition. Without a voice and presence before these city entities, the fabric of our neighborhood can be changed through zoning changes, and residents can lose their homesteads through code violation citations. So in 2017, we became the city's recognized resident association for this area and began to receive city notifications of requests for zoning changes as well as demolition notices. Unfortunately, demolition notices are the final step in the residence process that begins as a code violation and are shared by the city with resident associations only 3 months before our association, before the structure will be demolished. This, of course, doesn't provide enough time for our association to bring a structure up to standard. And the city does not notify our association about code violation citations that they issue. However, we did begin to receive calls from our residents asking for assistance with code violation citations. Many of our homeowners are senior citizens who are either physically unable to do their own repairs or yard work and or on fixed incomes and can't afford to hire someone to do their yard work or repair work. Time and time again, as we spoke with our residents while assisting them to resolve the citations, they told us about the negative interactions that they've had with code compliance officers. For example, a viejita who tried to explain to the code compliance officer that her hierbas were not weeds, but were medicinal teas. She was told that she would be fined $300 if she didn't have the plants mowed. Another resident was yelled at for having rotted boards in the front of his house and was told that his house would be demolished by the city if he didn't have the boards replaced within 10 days. These are just a couple of examples of how code compliance officers interact with our residents when supposedly enforcing code compliance issues. In none of these exchanges with code compliance officers did the officers provide information about city resources available to our residents. And in many instances, they didn't even explain the process to your residents. Interactions with code compliance officers is just the first step in dealing with these issues. If a resident chooses to contest a citation, they must request a hearing before municipal court. Most of our residents aren't aware that there's an option, so they end up paying fines or accumulating additional fines or ultimately losing their homes. As we've worked with the city to try to assist our residents, we've researched and learned about their many processes and know firsthand how complicated it is when trying to resolve a simple violation. It's almost impossible to navigate the city's process in cases where a homeowner is cited for home repairs and is unable to bring the house up to standard. In many cases, these types of citations ultimately lead to a notice to vacate and demolition. We brought to the department's city staff attention that a lot of the language used by their department is very technical and difficult for most people to understand, and we've asked that changes be made to the language. So here I'm sharing the flow chart that the city has on its website with a visual of the process that a resident would go through. If the resident would choose to contest, there's no information on the chart informing them of what documents or information they should present to help them with their case. For example, residents who go before this board at their hearing and may just plead for extended time to make improvements to their house are more than likely to be denied the time and will ultimately lose their case. However, if an individual has hired an engineer to provide a scope of work and presents an estimate from a contractor, then they may be more likely given additional time to work on improvements. For some who may have been advised by compliance officers to get a scope of work, the technical language was not understood, leaving the resident to try to overcome the language hurdle. If, however, it was explained, most of our residents would be unable to afford to hire engineers or contractors. So as we've worked with individual residents to resolve code compliance and demolition cases, we've worked together with the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center and the Westside Preservation Alliance on developing strategies to help our residents and identifying policy changes at the city that will help our residents remain in their homes. Meetings with code compliance officers, their supervisors, and the director of the city's Development Services Department to propose changes in the processes to include, which would include providing residents with city resources, to discuss code compliance officers' abuse of their power, to discuss developing a better understanding of our community, have not resulted in any positive changes or in a decrease of citations issued to our neighborhood. The Esperanza Peace and Justice Center has then shared with our association data that they collected in 2015 on code violations and demolition citations that were issued from the city of San Antonio, which showed that residents in District 5 were receiving the highest number of code violation citations in the city, followed by the residents of District 2, which is just east of San Antonio's downtown. As we continued our work to assist residents, the pandemic hit, but code compliance violations and demolition notices did not decrease. Our residents were anxious and stressed at the thought of having to pay code violation fees or losing their homes at a time when many were losing their jobs. Our association reached out to the mayor, city council members, the city manager, and other city staff to request a moratorium on demolitions during the pandemic. However, we received only two responses, and they were from city council members, neither of which were our representatives. So our association developed a PowerPoint presentation which included the data that the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center had compiled in 2015, as well as some of the heat maps that the Texas housers who had joined in on our fight. And we added additional information about code violations and demolitions impacting our residents and what was causing many to be displaced. As well as we also provided recommendations for changes in the process. We felt that the city should place a moratorium on owner-occupied houses until the city staff could make changes to the processes that were making it impossible for our residents to remain in their homes. One of the most critical being that case managers would be placed on every case to ensure that property owners would get wraparound services and resources that the city should provide. And as Heather stated, is actually legally required by the state to provide. But at one point, we were actually told by the city that it isn't legally required for them to provide services to our residents or to find them other locations to move to if they are being displaced. So we schedule meetings with our former city councilwoman and her staff to present our new PowerPoint and data to make another formal request for a demolition moratorium. The former councilwoman didn't meet with us, but we did meet with her staff. However, this meeting resulted in no action being taken by our former city councilwoman or her staff, and obviously she never took it beyond her office, so the city didn't take action. We then met again with the director of the city's Development Services Department, Michael Shannon, to present our PowerPoint and data and make another request for a demolition moratorium. The only new information that he shared with us was that code compliance officers were now providing residents with a resource sheet after issuing citations, which is not very helpful if our residents even had received any, because from those that we've worked with, we haven't heard that they have received any. A subsequent meeting with DSD, which was called by our new city councilwoman, Terry Castillo, did result in that department agreeing to provide her office with a monthly list of houses identified as dangerous premises, which is now, so that's earlier in the process, and will allow our association with more than 3 months to try to assist residents. So all of the data and recommendations made by the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center, the Westside Preservation Alliance, and the Historic Westside Residents Association have been presented to the city staff years before and have basically been ignored by the city staff. It's only now that the UT School of Law's Ousted report has been published that the city is being forced to respond to questions regarding compliance and demolition issues that we've been presenting to them for several years. Unfortunately, Michael Shannon continues to deny that the facts presented before him are true, and we're afraid that this may result in the city's continued code sweeps in our neighborhood, in more demolitions, and ultimately in the displacement of more of our residents. We remain hopeful, but with increasing property taxes and developers preying on our residents' properties, it's becoming more and more difficult to keep our residents in their homes. We're also hopeful because our new city councilwoman, who is a member of our association, a young woman who came on concerned about her neighborhood, the neighborhood she grew up in, and is now representing our neighborhood and knows the issues so is working to make policy changes at the city level that'll help to stop these code violations and demolitions. And as Heather mentioned, she also was able to get the city to fund a demolition mitigation pilot, so that we can work on ways to mitigate these demolitions. So that's our participation in code violations and demolitions. We are also very involved with our public housing residents who get targeted with notices to vacate. So anyway, that's what we're up to. Thank you.
So thank you, Leticia. Love you. You did great. I'd like to introduce now our querida Antonia Castañeda, who has been working alongside myself personally, the Esperanza, the Historic Westside Residents Association, to preserve la gente, the tangible and intangible of the historic Westside. I would like you to introduce yourself so that, I'm not going to give you all your amazing awards and your degrees and all that sort of stuff, but if you can just connect us to your connection to the Westside, and you're on. And thank you for being with us.
Gracias, Graciela, y gracias, Leti. That was great. That's a hard act to follow. So, buenos dias. I am Antonia Castañeda. I'm a Tejana. I was born in Crystal City, actually, but raised in the Pacific Northwest. So I was not raised in Texas. Came back to San Antonio almost 30 years ago and have enjoyed the Esperanza, the buena gente of the Esperanza. And it's through the work of the Esperanza then that I have become involved in historic preservation of specifically of the West Side communities. So in 2009, we formed the West Side Preservation Alliance because we lost La Gloria. And despite the community's efforts to save La Gloria, it still, as you saw in the film, it still came down. The eating of the claws of that monstrous demolition machine were just horrific. At any rate, so we realized that we were losing buildings of historic importance to the West Side, to the people, to the families, to the community. And we were also about to lose another building, what we call the Casa Abandonado, a wooden building right in the heart of the West Side on Guadalupe Street. And so we decided to form an organization. We formed the West Side Preservation Alliance, initially bringing together the various community and nonprofit groups in the West Side that were concerned with the development of the West Side, to put it in those terms. And eventually, most of the other groups left the organization, but Esperanza and lots of community members stayed to help the organization grow and thrive. So the West Side Preservation Alliance is a community-based organization that is focused on preserving the historic and cultural fabric of the West Side, of the working class communities of the West Side, as well as of the built environment, both tangible and intangible. And given the realities that we faced at the time, we established the organization on three basic principles. One is concientización, because we realized that both in the West Side, both the communities and the city offices, city departments that were concerned with historic preservation and related issues had no sense of the importance of the West Side, of its history, of its culture, of its people, of its communities, of its central importance to the development of San Antonio. And so the concientización part has to do then with consciousness raising of both the large community of the West Side and then of the city departments that are related to what happens to buildings in the West Side. And when I say concientización, I'm not indicating or meaning that people in the community, that gente don't know their history. They do. And it's not that they don't consider it important. They do. They have a sense of place and history and certainly understanding as well as analysis. But the issue is that because the standard and traditional offices of historic preservation and related entities in the city have not considered the West Side important. So the West Side has no public presence. The West Side, when we formed the WPA in 2009, had no historic districts. It had no recognition in the public sphere. And so then part of our effort was to raise that consciousness at all levels in the community and in the city. The second pillar is policy. We knew that policies that regulated the city, not only in historic preservation, but in other dimensions, did not respond and did not account for the needs of the people and communities in the West Side, as we just saw in this discussion of code compliance. And then the other pillar was to save structures like La Gloria, which we lost. And in the 11 years that we've been in existence, we've won some battles, to put it in those terms, although I don't like military terms. We've won some of our efforts to save buildings, and then we have lost some. And in one of those losses, the Univision building, which housed and was the first Spanish language radio station in the United States and the entire universe, and also the first Spanish language television station. And we lost that building. And I want to underscore a couple of points in this regard. So one city official said, "Why do you want to save that building? It's ugly and it's falling apart. And why are you spending so much energy on it? It's ugly." And another city official said to us, "Why do you want to save that building? It has no history." And so the impact of that was pretty horrific, as you can imagine. And so we were able to get an injunction and stop the demolition for 2 weeks. We went to court. The judge banged her gavel and said, "You," meaning the WPA and the Esperanza, "have no standing in this court. The demolition can proceed." And so our reaction was really strong. We knew we had lost that particular effort, but Graciela, for starters, runs to the site and climbs over a fence, literally. I should have thought to put that picture up. Climbs over the fence to try to protect the building, or at least signal that she was willing to put her life at risk to save that try to save that building because it mattered so much, because it was so important, because it was our history, because it was our reality, because we all grew up listening to Paseo R and radio and television in Spanish. And I grew up in the state of Washington, and the station did not reach there, but what it communicated did, because people migrated from Texas, and they would talk about it. At that point, it was the elders would talk about it as we were working in the fields. I did not jump over the fence because at my age I couldn't. So I went around the other side. Gloria Ramirez said, "Hey, there's an opening on the other side." So I went around that side, and the bottom line is other people also joined in that effort. And the bottom line is we knew we were trespassing. The police came, begged us to leave. They didn't want to arrest us. And we said, we're not leaving, so you'll have to arrest us. And they did. And so we spent the night in jail. And I tell you this story only to inform all of us who are listening of the importance of preserving the structures that matter to the people, and that the people built, and that the people lived in, and that they worshiped in, and that they danced in, and they met in. All of those, that they bought groceries in, that they went to the theater in. All of those structures matter. And if we don't preserve them, if we have no public presence, then we're considered not to exist. And the effort historically has been not to recognize our presence, except as workers, or when labor is needed, and then the spigot is opened and then it's closed again, in terms of Mexico in particular. And so our effort at that point was to underscore the importance of preserving structures, as well as other elements that are not structures, but like nichos or gardens or fruit trees. So that's the basic frame of the Westside Preservation Alliance and our work. And so I want to make a couple of points, pick up on what other folks have said. So I'm an historian by training, taught history for a long time in colleges and universities, but I'm now retired. I've been retired for 12 years or so. Heather Way commented that San Antonio was an outlier in terms of large cities in Texas that had few code compliance issues and removal of people from their homes. And so I want to comment, I want us to understand historical trajectories, what they mean, and how they are manifest then so many years later. So, so one can say San Antonio is an outlier. On the other hand, we can say, no, it's not. That is intentional. So if we look at the cities that Heather mentioned, San Antonio, Dallas, Houston, Austin, and Fort Worth, San Antonio is the only quote unquote Mexican city, or the only Hispanic Latino city, and has been historically. And so the structures of inequality that we're living with now were established very, very early in the 19th century. And so one can say that San Antonio is an outlier, but I understand the comparison, and I appreciate it, but I want us to understand that that quote unquote outlier status is really a historical status, and really is the the logical consequence of all of those structured inequalities and relationships, and how city government has historically treated San Antonio's West Side and East Side. So in that sense, no, San Antonio is not an outlier. San Antonio is very much the current reality of code compliance is a consequence of the history that we're talking about. And of the elements that shaped public and private disinvestment, including redlining, no banks, no grocery stores, and so on. There was something else I wanted to mention before I forget. The other element that I wanted to communicate is that as an organization that seeks to preserve the cultural, historical fabric and built environment, we entered the issues of code compliance, zoning, city codes, regulations, kind of in through the back door. And what I mean by that is, as we sought to protect the buildings, as we sought to protect the spaces, as we sought to engage with the public officials, publicly elected officials, we wound up realizing that if in order to save the structures of buildings, the homes that we wanted to or felt needed to be, we had to become knowledgeable about all of these various codes and strictures and restrictions. And so we entered into those spaces that we were not, this is not our field. And so it was learning on the ground, and in my case, not learning very well, but Leticia and Graciela and Kayla and other folks have. It was about going to city council meetings. It was about meeting with city council people and trying to convince them. And in some cases we could, and in other cases we couldn't. It was about organizing community to come to city council meetings and to speak and to be heard and to engage. And so I don't think the city council, the city council of San Antonio had ever had a group of people come in with accordions and play their accordions and sing and speak and use the cultural forms that we have to communicate the issues, the political issues, the economic issues, the cultural issues, the historical issues. And so, so I think I'll stop. Let me check the time. Yeah, I think I'll stop there so we have some time for additional questions and discussion and conversación. The final point that I'll make in terms of the WPA is that I did for NALAC something that I can't remember what it's called, where you talk for 5 minutes and that's it. So I did a very brief talk, and I'll only use a couple of sentences of it. What I said is, si no contamos nuestra historia, no contamos en la historia. So let me end there. Thank you for being with us. This is a great session and a great conversation. And gracias mil.
Kayla.
So our next panelist is going to be Lawson Picasso. She is the Public Involvement Coordinator for WSP. And in her previous work, she worked for Councilman Trevino in District 1 as the Director of Communications. Lawson has lived experiences of housing insecurities and is an ally and strong support for fighting for better systems and redefining policy that responds to the true needs of our community. She recently served on the 2022 Housing Bond Committee, where she worked alongside her fellow committee members to clearly define processes that offered a social safety net for the most vulnerable residents. Originally from San Diego, Texas, Lawson has called San Antonio home for 10 years and looks forward to continuing her investment in San Antonio to preserve our history and our homes and protect our neighborhoods from unnecessary displacement. And I can just say that working alongside Lawson on the bond committee, she really has fire, and I loved working with her. So Lawson, take over.
Thank you, Kayla. I appreciate that. And thank you all for allowing me the space to be able to talk to you all today about my experiences here in San Antonio, and how I've used my own personal experiences in my life, both as an adolescent and as an adult who has, as an adolescent, as a child, I grew up and housing was always wishy-washy. I was raised by some wonderful, amazing women, and you know, with half of my life was spent with my grandmother and half of my life was spent of being raised by my mom. And I am so incredibly proud of that experience. Here in San Antonio, I have my own experiences of housing insecurities. And so I've utilized a lot of those experiences and the experiences that I've heard working with the community, especially with District 1, and especially this past year during a pandemic when it was very evident that these issues were always here before. It's just they were finally given a spotlight and amplified, and the work was starting to get done a little bit faster. As Kayla mentioned, I was very fortunate to represent District 2 on the housing committee for the upcoming bond. And though 150 million will not be is not enough to support the need, it was a great start, and I was happy to be able to align myself with other committee members to be able to fight and advocating and identifying those funds that would best support the needs of our most vulnerable community and the bigger areas of disparity. It's been mentioned before. I think it's very concerning about the research that was done by UT Austin and showing the increase of demolitions because of code violations. One thing that Councilman Roberto Trevino had always supported was identifying ways that we could alleviate some of these demolitions. And in fact, the Under One Roof program came into fruition and it was born from his effort to try to preserve a home and to keep people in their homes. And kind of identifying that when looking at the housing bond, we were very unique in the sense of that we weren't identifying specific projects. We were looking at process, which for me was a beautiful thing because it opened up the floodgates to ensuring that language was incorporated into our process to ensure that when we are looking at housing, when we are looking at our communities, that we are not displacing them by gentrifying neighborhoods, by increasing their property taxes, by it becoming a snowball of effects in what the city has defined as support, right? As help. It's like, oh, we're developing new homes in these areas and we thought this is what you wanted. And that's not the need. The need is not to try to develop new homes that are going to push people out, but to try to keep people in the homes that they have, in the neighborhoods that they have. And so one of the motions that I made this past Wednesday was to incorporate give teeth to a process which is called the request for proposal process, also known as RFP, and incorporate the displacement impact assessment into that process. And so what this would do, it would require every single agency, every developer, every organization that is wanting to submit or to bid on any projects that would require bond funding to incorporate what their plan would be to ensuring that folks that may be impacted, whether it's directly or indirectly, that there is an assessment there, that there is a proactive plan of engagement and how they're going to support them. And so initially there was, the language is not as clearly defined. And the way that it read was that, it would just be before this assessment, this impact assessment would just have to be done before awarding the bond funding. And I did not like that because it just seemed like it was just going to be another box to be checked and not a real comprehensive, meaningful way of ensuring that another developer did not come in here just to check the box and continue to go with their agenda as per usual. And it's in requiring it at the very beginning, it means that everybody who wants this money, everybody who says they want to make an impact and help people, they had to have this in place. They had to ensure that they were going to have a plan, and they had to ensure that what they were planning to do was in the best interest for the community, and it would be part of their scoring process. So much like for those that are not as familiar with the request for proposal process, they have to score, they have to get a certain grade, and based on that grade is how we define what the top, typically 3 to 5 contractors are the ones to be interviewed as like the finalist before they're receiving funding. And so in looking at that, I didn't want us to just look at the finalists. I wanted us to look at everybody. I wanted there to be something in place for everybody to ensure that everybody was looking at these projects with an equitable lens. So I am a big supporter for, and I've lived here for 10 years and officially feel like I am San Antonian. I can finally say that, this is it. I made the decade mark, and have been so humbled by the stories that I've heard, the history that is here. And I mean, you can go into any neighborhood, and every neighborhood has a pulse, it has a heartbeat, and there's a story and there's history. And San Antonio is one of many, many layers of history and especially in the Westside. And so in ensuring this and in seeing that the demolitions are occurring, it both breaks my heart and frustrates me, because we listen to the city and how they are able to easily justify their actions. And I always have an ear to the ground and trying to figure out the puzzle, figure out, okay, where is the justification coming from? One of the things that we also hear on city council is, well, what was the ROI? What was the return of investment? And for me, I believe, and I've seen it based on my experiences with District 1 and us really combing through budgets and funding and process and programs that have been put in place for housing. And it's a lot more affordable to keep people in the homes that they have than it is to have to then figure out new housing for the folks that we have already displaced. And the safety net that is currently in place for those that are displaced across our communities, it's weak, it has holes. And until we are able to give a net that is strong for everybody, then we need to ensure that we're keeping people in the homes and in the neighborhoods they have today. And so I have been a big advocate for ensuring that, we look at everybody, we look at our seniors, we look at the folks that are currently experiencing homelessness, that we ensure that, those that feel like there is no window of hope, that we give them a hope. And it is my hope that with this bond money, as it continues to move now to, the baton has now been passed from the committee to city council, that they continue to see this as a moral document, and that they do not take what we fought so hard for, to ensuring that the money be placed where the need is, and that they agree with what the community wants. Because my role was to ensure that it was not selfish. It was not a selfish agenda. It was a selfless agenda. And we heard from the public. We heard several times from the public in public comments on what their need was and what they wanted this money to be used for. And I hope that as our elected officials, that they continue to do what their community is asking of them. And then, continuing to advocate for that once it goes to a vote, and it's now back in our hands to be able to ensure that this passes and that these funds go there. But the bond is just one very small sliver of funding. There are other allocations of funding that are federally restrictive, and we have to adhere to the federal guidelines of how this funding will go. And it's my hope that through the folks that we currently have leading at a federal level, at a state level, and at a local level, that they are identifying these funds to ensuring that the communities in the east, south, and west side are protected, and that we are finding ways that can help curb the code violations. In addition to that, we are looking at the current code processes in San Antonio with the UDC. I don't know I always mix up my words for what UDC stands for. So, Berlin, but I'm going to have to say just UDC for that. Unified Development Code. Thank you. I always want to say universal, so that's why I didn't even want to try. But with the code and to seeing, are these codes put in place to benefit the community or to benefit the developer? And it shouldn't be the developer. The developer should be working for us and to ensure that they're designing things, especially if they're looking at public funding, and designing things that are there to support the community, to help the community continue to have healthy growth and thrive. We don't need cookie cutter homes in our neighborhoods. Our homes tell stories. In fact, I just mentioned to a colleague of mine who was coming in from Chicago, and I said, you can go into some of these neighborhoods and you can smell the masa, you can smell the good food, you can hear the music on a Sunday when it's time to, you're ready to clean and you have the music going. This is the pulse of our community. These are the stories. And if we continue to just allow for these processes to not be held accountable to what they're doing to humanity, these are people, then what is it? And so I'm really, really happy that this year, especially coming out of a pandemic, we are having these conversations.
So this is a good segue to start the question and answers. And we'll start with you, Lawson, but then we'll move on to Antonia and Letty, or Kayla, or whoever else wants to answer these questions. But Lawson, will there be money in the bond to help residents repair their homes? And two, what can we do to get that bond approved?
Absolutely, yes. I have the paper in front of me where we advocated for funding. Home ownership rehabilitation and preservation, we were able to get it to, I believe it was 45 or 50. I can't remember. We were able to get it up, but we were able to, there will be about $45 million that will be going towards allocating funding for rehabilitation preservation. Unfortunately, there was some language changes there that it would be for households making up to 50% of the area median income, but it would prioritize folks that are at the 30% area median income. So that was a win for us, that we would have money allocated for that. Okay, and for people who don't know what 30% or 50% area median income, do you or Kayla want to share what that amount is? So for area median income, that means that 30% of their, you know what, I'm going to let Kayla, because I feel like I'm going to mix my words up here too.
So the area median income is actually calculated by HUD, and unfortunately we are combined with San Marcos, which really drives it up. But for a family of three, it's a little over $20,000 a year. So when you break that down, I want to check the calculation, but I believe it was around $50 an hour. And that's 30% AMI. And then at the 50% AMI, again, it depends on your family size. If you're looking at a single individual, that same that same level is going to be much higher because it's just one person in the household. But 50% was around 38,000 a year. So that's still a really low income, and there is a huge area of need between the 30 and 50% AMI, but the need is more than double at 30% and below. So when we're looking at such limited funds, we really have to take the priority, and the difference between somebody at 30% AMI or below, maybe 20%, and the person at 50% is that the person at 50% can afford a 30% unit, but they can't. The person at 20% cannot afford that 50% unit. It's impossible. You just don't make
what
that.
I was trying to do is to avoid 30%, 50%, but basically, just to say the numbers, like, so, you know, the neighborhood that the Alazan Apache courts are in, the average income for people there is between $8,000 and $10,000.
Yes, that puts us
on, right, Social Security, SSI. You know, it's very limited, and so when you're being told you can buy a home or, you know, whatever at 50%, you can't even buy anything beyond. You can't, you know, yeah, rent has to be at $200 and $300 and $400 max, right? And so anyway, I don't want to get caught up in this. I did want to continue asking. Are there other questions like people can put down on Facebook? I know Jorge Esteves, who used to work for Shirley Gonzalez, mentions here, many developers have been white men from Austin and other places that come to profit from our systemic oppression. Yep. Antonia, Letty, do you all want to try to hit that, or other people who are Lawson or Kayla?
Well, I'm happy to even give an experience on this. The housing committee actually went on a bus tour, and on the bus tour, they identified certain locations that would basically be examples of the projects. And the first one was a Franklin development in the medical center that was for workforce housing. So folks that were making about 60% of the area median income and above. And again, a little healthier of an income there. And so the CEO was there, the president was there, and he gave us swag and fed us breakfast. And it was a white man. And he tried to tell us that he knew what was in the best interest for the community, which is very, it was humorous. So I 100% agree that we are seeing these developers coming from out of San Antonio and or being white, and them not really having that pulse for what the community actually needs and what the investment should be on.
Well, I just want to say, in our experience as residents, what we are sick and tired of hearing is that development will help to improve our situation, our lived experience. And, you know, that's always to us interpreted as, oh, here comes the great white hope to save the poor Mexicans from their fate of, you know, being uneducated or unskilled or whatever. When in fact, no, we're very skilled, we are educated, but the city has ignored our neighborhood. And so, you know, we're in the situation, as Antonia said, because of policies that the city put years, you know, generations before. So I'm sorry, Antonia, I want to.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Letty, and thank you, Lawson. So the only thing I wanted to add, just to pick up on it, is that, yes, there are these folks coming from out of town, and by and large, they're white, they're Euro-American, but the city welcomes them. So for me, the issue is not these folks coming in, it's what the city does or doesn't do, and what policies the city does or doesn't put in place. And so the city welcomes outside developers, and they also, as well as inside developers, and they also, oftentimes the city, when hiring for positions, will bring in people from the outside. when the city wants a study done, they bring in a consulting firm from Boston or Philadelphia or North Carolina. So for me, the issue isn't the people coming from the outside, it's what the city does or doesn't do and what policies and regulations and requirements it has, or more specifically, doesn't have. So for me, organizing is to organize at the city level and hold the city and our publicly elected officials accountable.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we saw with the decade of downtown was not only millions, but billions of dollars that were invested in not 0, 30, 50, 80% AMI, but luxury apartments, luxury housing for whoever could afford the thousands of dollars to buy these places or rent. And now when we're trying to ask for the same equity and put the monies into poor and working class people, they get scared, they balk, they say no, that's too much money, right? So what do you all want to comment on that?
Well, what I'm seeing is that there are so many people, even here in San Antonio, that aren't aware that there are still workers out there making $8 an hour. I mean, they hear that and they're shocked. But the fact is, there are so many places still hiring at $8 and $10 an hour, and that is just not a livable wage. So this stigma around being low income, they say that you're uneducated, they say that you don't want to work or you're not a hard worker. Some of these jobs are the hardest jobs in the world. I mean, I remember when I worked at a gas station, I was a manager, but I was still working 10 hours, 12 hours on my feet. I had people smack me. I've been robbed at gunpoint. I've had slushies thrown at my head, people yelling and screaming at me when their credit cards don't work. People are so rude and disrespectful to service workers, and they don't make a good wage. It's just, they don't. So until we can start paying our people the right dollars for their work, then we need to make sure that the housing reflects the wage here. I mean, the city has no problem spending billions of dollars on ridiculous things, but they don't want to pay their workers. Because even the city has the Parks and Rec starting at $9.79 an hour.
And I will add on that, we talk about, and I 100% agree, we need to keep our elected officials accountable. The frustrating part is that the folks on the city staff, besides the city manager, they don't have an expiration date. They don't have to be voted in. And that's the frustrating part, is that the folks that are providing these recommendations and framing these programs to bring to city council, they're the ones that are making the six figures and the ones that get to retire comfortably. And it's incredibly frustrating that we're very limited on how we can hold them accountable. I agree with Kayla. There is a workforce, and what we pay people currently does not mirror the need to live, a quality of life. I worked in social work. I believe that everybody should have one job, at least one job, one experience being being a server, and it was $2 an hour being a waitress. It just blows my mind that we're still looking at this, and tips are what people are living off of. And so that there's definitely different layers of need and different issues that need to be addressed, but absolutely holding people accountable at a local level, because they are our first line of defense. And if they are not defending us, then how are we going to actually think that they're going to be voicing at higher levels to help support them in defending us?
Antonia, you're muted.
Yeah, there I am. Thank you. If I can just add to what Kayla and Lawson have said, and that is in terms of gender and women who make still across the board in whatever job, make 78 cents for every dollar that men make. And so the gendered and other inequalities in the wage scales and earning possibilities and and other not services, but other benefits. And so, and we know that certainly in public housing, the largest percentage of residents are women with children. And yet they're earning at not even minimum wage in many cases. So yes, especially to Lawson's conversation about holding city staff also accountable. I am, and you're right. Their term doesn't expire, and they are not visible. So you're left with few avenues of access or discussion or policy change.
Right. And I think the city continues to, we're now spending millions of dollars for, to train our workforce to get these high-tech jobs, to get other jobs that are outside of the hospitality service industry. But the truth is, those jobs are going to continue to stay in San Antonio. We're not going to lose that tourism business ever, right? So how do we demand that the Grand Hyatt, the Hiltons, all these major monopolies in the hotel industry, how SeaWorld and Fiesta Texas pay their workers a living wage that is, is no longer $15. It's, let's talk about 20, and it keeps on going up each year. So, we talked $15 5 years ago. So let's increase that. And we're getting to the time that we have to shut down. It's 11:59. There's some, in addition to low incomes, there are also many people who are not compensated or not in a position to work, including limitations put on people who have been in detention and some immigrants. Their loved ones are supporting housing them, if anyone is. If San Antonio claims to be a compassionate city, it would address these needs, not throw them back in the face of its residents who are doing the most to help out. And then somebody said, please share more info about Monday's meeting at 10:30. So the city council has many subcommittees, and this Monday at 10:30 is a planning and something committee that Terry Castillo is one of the members on. And what they have done is that they have invited Michael Shannon, the director of Development Services Department, who is the head guy of this code enforcement program. They're going to allow him to counter Heather's research and not invite Heather to the table. So we want, if can't make it to on Monday, which we're trying to see if she might be able to attend, can we, the community, be there and try to make statements and read the report and say, I read the report, or this is my lived experience, or this is what the Historic Westside Residents Association did research on 3 years ago, and this is what the whatever we've done, whatever we know, to be able to share that at 10:30. And it's at the Municipal Plaza. That's where they have their regular city council meetings. They usually meet in the big room at the A session room or whatever, but this is the B session room. And you would have to probably get there ahead of time and park and then sign up to speak. But the more we can, the better. And Natalie has also put out Check Mi Barrio No Se Vende, a San Antonio homeowner's guide to staying put. It's a booklet that Esperanza put out a few years ago, along with the signage of Mi Barrio No Se Vende. Those signs are gone. We need to make more of them. We need to make more of these booklets. But again, these are things, those booklets the city should be putting out, not assume, making our organizations do that work. And the work that Leticia, Kayla, Lawson, Antonia, and so many others of you out there watching, or who have told these stories. We're doing that because we love our gente, we love our communities, we love our culture and our heritage. But it's shame on the city of San Antonio for not doing its work. So I need to close. I don't know if any of you all want to say any last minute sentence or idea or anything before we shut down. And before we close off, I know there are a couple of slides of how to contact people with the Westside Preservation Alliance and Historic Westside Residents Association, as well as where to reach out to, well, it's a little small. There's some contacts with the legal services. So Antonia, Kayla, Lawson, Letty, do you all have anything to say?
I just want to say that the most important thing that anyone can ever do is use their voice and use their lived experiences to make change. You can bury your head in the sand and you can pretend like this is not happening, but the truth is the only way to affect change is for these stories to get out there and for you to use your voice. So show up to meetings if you can, make public comments, go to your neighborhood associations, your neighborhood leaders, band together, because this is your life, this is your home, this is your community. These are your neighbors, your friends, your family. You have to stick up for each other, because if you don't, who will?
Organize, organize, organize.
And organize some more.
And organize some more. And mil gracias, everybody. Thank you to all of the organizers, the interpreters, the speakers, and the people who attended and who stayed with us for the 2 hours or for whatever amount of time they could. We are deeply grateful, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next City Council meeting, at the next WPA meeting, Mi Barrio No Se Vende meeting, Esperanza meeting. Kayla, what is it? The Historic Westside Residents Association meeting.
And Coalition for Tenant Justice.
And Coalition for Democratic Justice, definitely.
Tenant Justice, yeah.
Tenant Justice. And come see me on the BSB board.
Okay.
Letty?
Just thank you for the opportunity to put this information out in the public. You know, the more we keep up this discussion, the more opportunities we have to make changes, I think.
And again, share this. It will be on our YouTube. It's on our Facebook. I've seen that many people did share today, but the more people that listen to this, the better informed they are. And we're going to fight, and we will continue to win, and they will continue to be scared and put up more, but we will continue to be present. So muchas gracias, and thank you to our friends and colleagues at the University of Texas in San Antonio and the People's Academy. Muchas gracias, and have a great day.
Gracias. Gracias. Gracias.